Hey everyone. As many of you know, my channel is currently demonetized, and many of our videos were deleted. Creating stories and videos for you still takes a lot of time, effort, and support behind the scenes, so I created a donation link for anyone who would like to support the channel. If my videos have entertained you, helped you relax, or become part of your daily routine, even a small donation truly means a lot and helps me continue creating more content for you. I genuinely love making stories for you all, but demonetization has made it much harder to keep posting consistently. If you'd like to support the channel, simply click the PayPal donation link in the description or the pinned comment below, or scan the QR code on the screen. You'll be taken directly to our donation page, where you can donate any amount you want. You can pay easily using PayPal, debit card, credit card, and Apple Pay. Thank you so much for supporting the channel and being part of this journey. Your kindness truly keeps this channel alive. Now, let's dive into today's story. I'm Nathan. I spend a lot of my time reading court records and custody filings, because the strangest, most calculated cruelty I've ever come across rarely happens between strangers. It happens between people who once stood at the same altar. The story I'm about to tell you is fiction, stitched together from patterns I've seen too often, and it's built around a quiet truth worth holding on to. A chained gate and an unanswered phone are almost never the start of a betrayal. They're the moment it finally becomes visible. Here's the educational core, told straight. In most of the United States, both legal parents share custody rights until a court says otherwise, meaning a relative who hides children from a fit parent isn't protecting family. They're committing a serious offense, sometimes a felony. People underestimate how much a calm parent who documents everything can do. Dated photos, certified letters, phone logs, witnesses. The loud, panicked parent loses. The one who keeps records wins. Watch how our protagonist refuses to break a single window, throw a single punch, or say a single thing he can't prove. And watch how that patience becomes the sharpest weapon in the room. The gate was wrapped in a bicycle chain, the kind with a cheap brass padlock, and Israel Charles sat in his car looking at it for a full minute before he understood what he was seeing. He had driven 90 minutes for this. Every other Sunday, by an agreement they'd all signed 2 years ago when the marriage cracked, he picked up his sons, Eli, 7, and Owen, 5, from his mother-in-law's house in the foothills outside the city. He came at 4. He left at 6 on the dot. He never once was late, because being late was the kind of thing this family wrote down. His wife, Shelby, didn't answer her phone. Not the first call, not the 5th. Israel got out. The house behind the gate was a long, low ranch the color of dried clay, with a circular drive and a fountain that hadn't run in years. Bertha McBride's house. His mother-in-law, the woman who, at his wedding, had toasted him with a smile so warm and a sentence so sharp he'd needed an hour to feel the cut. To Israel, who married up and knows it. A woman across the road was watering plants that didn't need water. She kept glancing over. When Israel walked toward the chained gate, she came to her own fence and spoke without quite looking at him. They left, she said quietly, 3 days ago. Big moving truck. The old lady told the mailman they're staying with family back east. A pause. She said you weren't going to be coming around anymore. Israel stood very still. The mountains behind the house were going gold at the edges. Somewhere far off, a dog barked twice and quit. Did you see the boys? He asked. In the truck cab, with the daughter. The neighbor finally met his eyes. The little one was crying. I'm sorry. I didn't know who to call. Israel thanked her. His voice came out level, which surprised him, because inside his chest something had gone cold and clear, like water under ice. He walked back to his car. He did not rattle the gate. He did not shout Shelby's name at the windows. He took out his phone, photographed the chain, the padlock, the empty drive, the house, the street sign with the address visible. Then he called the police, gave the dispatcher the custody order's case number from memory, and waited. This is the part where I'll tell you who Israel Charles actually was, because his calm wasn't a personality trait. It was a wound that had healed into armor. He'd grown up in foster placements, 6 of them by the time he was 12, each one ending the same way, with a social worker in a parked car and a garbage bag of his things in the trunk. He'd learned early that the people who controlled the paperwork controlled his whole life, and that screaming at adults only proved you were the problem. So he'd become quiet. He'd become observant. He'd aged out at 18 with a high school diploma and a habit of reading every document anyone put in front of him twice. He became an actuary, not glamorous. He assessed risk for an insurance company, ran models, predicted the future and probabilities. It suited him perfectly. His entire professional life was the study of how small, ignored signals predict large disasters. He could look at 1,000 variables and tell you which one was lying. He had not, however, run the model on his own marriage. That was the failure that would haunt him. When the officer came back from the gate, he'd radioed for the gate code, gotten nothing, and walked the perimeter. He approached Israel's window with the careful, padded steps of a man delivering weight. "Sir," he said, "I need you to stay in your car a minute." "Why?" The officer hesitated. "Your sons. According to the neighbor and what I'm getting from dispatch on the address." He stopped, restarted. "They were already gone before you got here. 3 days, looks like. I'm sorry. This isn't a scene I can do anything with tonight. No crime that I can see at this property right now. It's a custody dispute, and that's family court, not us. Your sons were already." For one black second, Israel had heard the sentence end a different way, and his whole body had braced for it. Then it landed where it actually landed. Gone, moved, taken. And the relief was so violent it felt almost like grief. "They were taken out of state," Israel said. "I have joint legal custody. There's a court order that says neither parent removes them from the county without written agreement. I have it on my phone. I can show you." The officer's face changed by a single degree. The difference between a man humoring a sad husband and a man realizing he's looking at something with teeth. "Show me," he said. Israel showed him. The officer read it twice, the way Israel himself would have. Then he wrote a report number on the back of his card and handed it over. "Get a lawyer first thing tomorrow," the officer said, "and keep doing exactly what you're doing." He nodded at the phone in Israel's hand. "Taking pictures, writing it down. Don't do anything dumb. People in your spot usually do something dumb and it costs them their kids." Israel looked at the card, then at the chained gate, then at the gold mountains. "I never do anything dumb," he said. "That's been my whole problem." Bertha McBride was 71 years old and had buried 2 husbands, the first for love and the second for property. She owned the ranch, a strip mall, and a quiet majority share in a regional title and escrow company that handled real estate closings across 3 counties. She had built it from a single notary stamp and 40 years of knowing which documents people signed without reading. Her grip on her family was the same as her grip on her business, total, smiling, and based entirely on controlling what other people believed to be true. She had never liked Israel, not because he was poor, she'd been poor, but because he couldn't be read. She'd spent her life learning to find the lever in a person. The debt, the vanity, the fear. Israel had no debt, no vanity she could find, and the only thing he feared, she'd eventually decided, was being made powerless again. So that, she resolved, was exactly what she would do to him. Make him powerless. Make him a man with no children, no proof, and no standing, until he gave up and went away like a stain finally scrubbed out. She'd started 2 years ago quietly, before the divorce was even final. Shelby, her daughter, was the instrument. Shelby was beautiful and weak in the specific way of someone who has never once been told no by their mother, and so has never developed a spine of her own. Bertha had whispered into that softness for a year. "He's cold, Shelby. He's calculating. Have you noticed how he watches everything? That's not love. That's surveillance. A man like that, when he finally moves against you, you won't see it coming." She'd planted the story so carefully that Shelby came to believe she'd thought of it herself. That Israel was dangerous. That the boys needed protecting. That leaving was an act of courage. The move east was Bertha's plan down to the truck rental. A cousin in another state. A new school district. A head start of months before any court could catch up. And the masterstroke, the thing Bertha was proudest of, was the documentation. Because Bertha owned a title company, she understood that whoever produces the paper first usually wins. So over the past year, she had quietly built a paper version of Israel that did not exist. A few incident notes Shelby had been coached to email to herself, timestamped, describing arguments that never happened the way they were described. A counselor, an old friend of Bertha's, who'd seen Shelby twice and written that Shelby presented as fearful of her spouse. A locksmith receipt for changing the locks after a frightening incident. None of it was a smoking gun. All of it, stacked, built a slow, smooth narrative of a frightened woman fleeing a frightening man. When Israel filed his emergency motion, Bertha intended to be ready with a thick folder and a soft voice, and to win the way she always won, by being the calmest liar in the room. She had made exactly one mistake. She had assumed that Israel, faced with the loss of his children, would do what frightened parents do: rage, beg, break something, prove the story right. She had never had a model run on her by a man who predicted disasters for a living. Israel did not hire the aggressive lawyer everyone recommended. He hired a quiet woman named Esther Drake, semi-retired, who'd spent 30 years in family court and had the unhurried manner of someone who'd seen every trick twice. He chose her for one reason. When he laid out his situation in her office, she didn't say, "We'll fight them." She said, "Tell me everything you know about your mother-in-law's business." "Title and escrow," he said. "Why?" Esther smiled the way a chess player smiles when their opponent moves a piece they were hoping for. "Because people who hide children always think the children are the only secret they're keeping. They're never right about that." The emergency hearing came fast. Israel's joint custody and the out-of-state removal made it urgent. Bertha and Shelby flew back for it, confident, the thick folder ready. Shelby wore soft colors and kept her eyes down. Bertha sat in the gallery like a queen attending a coronation she had, arranged, and Israel sat at the table and did almost nothing. He didn't accuse. When Shelby's lawyer painted him as cold and controlling, he didn't object or flinch. He simply looked at the judge with the tired patience of a man who's been lied about before. When the fearful spouse counselor's letter was entered, Esther asked only one question on cross. "Doctor, how many sessions did you have with Miss McBride?" "2. And did you ever meet, interview, or evaluate Mr. Charles?" "No, no further questions." It was small, but it was a thread, and Esther had a habit of finding the one thread that, pulled, unravels the whole garment. The judge, unconvinced by either side's drama but troubled by the unilateral interstate move, ordered the boys returned to the county pending a full evaluation, appointed a neutral custody evaluator, and, this was the moment Bertha's face did something it almost never did, which was tighten, ordered all parties to produce financial and communication records. Because Shelby's lawyer had argued Israel was controlling the family finances, and Esther had said, mildly, "Then by all means, Your Honor, let's see all the finances, everyone's, including who paid for the moving truck and the new lease." Bertha had walked into the courtroom to control the story. She walked out having agreed, on the record, to open her books. Here is what Israel had understood that Bertha had not. The fight was never going to be won on the question of who was the better parent. That was a swamp of he said, she said, where the calmest liar wins, and Bertha was the calmest liar he'd ever met. So Israel refused to fight on that ground at all. He moved the entire war onto the one terrain where he was the master, and she was merely confident. Documents and risk. He'd spent his career learning that fraud isn't hidden in the big lie. It's hidden in the small inconsistencies between documents that were supposed to agree. The locksmith receipt was dated. The counselor's letter referenced a date. Shelby's self-authored incident emails had timestamps. The lease back east had a signing date. The moving truck had a contract date. So while Esther handled the law, Israel built a timeline, a single, brutal spreadsheet. The kind of thing he made every day at work. He laid every document Bertha's side had produced along one axis and the calendar along the other. And the lies which had looked smooth one at a time began to contradict each other. The frightening incident that supposedly prompted the locksmith was dated a Tuesday. Israel's work badge logs, which he subpoenaed for himself, showed him 3 states away at a conference that entire week, with a hotel folio and 2 colleagues who'd shared his dinner. The counselor's letter described Shelby as currently fearing for her safety in the home on a date when Shelby's own credit card showed her on a girls' weekend at a wine resort, posting photos. The moving truck had been reserved. Israel found this through the rental company's public confirmation that Shelby had forwarded to her own email and never deleted, 11 days before the supposedly spontaneous, fearful flight. You don't flee in terror on a plan you booked 11 days in advance. You execute a strategy. But the spreadsheet was just the knife. Israel was after the artery, and the artery was Bertha's business. He remembered something from a dinner years earlier, back when he was still trying to be liked. Bertha, 2 glasses of wine in, had bragged that her title company smoothed things over for certain favored clients, that she could make a closing happen fast, make a lien not show up until after, make problems disappear for the right people. At the time, he'd thought it was an old woman boasting. Now, looking at a court order that required her to open her books, he thought it was something else, he told Esther. Esther's eyes sharpened. "If she's been concealing liens or backdating documents in escrow closings," she said slowly, "that's not a family court matter. That's title fraud. That's the kind of thing that ends a license, and sometimes ends in indictment." She tapped the table. "But we can't go fishing. We need a reason for the court to look that's connected to our case." Israel had already found it. He turned his laptop around. The new lease back east, the one for the house where Shelby and the boys were staying, had been arranged through a property management company. And that company, buried 3 layers down in the ownership records Israel had spent a weekend untangling, was partly owned by Bertha's title company. Bertha hadn't just sent her daughter and grandchildren away. She'd moved them into a properties inside her own concealed business web and had quietly papered the lease to make Shelby look like an independent woman starting a new life on her own dime, when in fact Bertha had funded the entire flight. The same lie that hid the money trail was the lie that exposed the business. She built a wall, Esther said softly, staring at the screen, and she used her own bricks. The next hearing was where Bertha realized, for the first time in 40 years, that she was not the smartest person in the room, and worse, that she had been losing for weeks without knowing it. It happened slowly, which made it worse. Esther didn't open with the spreadsheet. She let Shelby's side put on their whole show first. The soft colors, the downcast eyes, the careful testimony about a controlling husband. Bertha sat in the gallery, relaxing by the minute, certain she'd won. Then Esther stood and began to ask questions, and each question was a single document, entered quietly into evidence. The badge logs and hotel folio, against the incident date. Ms. McBride, your daughter's exhibit, says Mr. Charles, frightened her in the home on the 14th. These records show him in another state from the 12th to the 16th. Can you explain? The wine resort photos, against the counselors, fearing for her safety date. The judge looked at a smiling Shelby holding a glass of rosé, then at the letter, then over his glasses at the counselor's empty chair. The moving truck reservation 11 days before the spontaneous flight. And then last, the ownership chain, the lease, the property management company, the title company, the name McBride sitting at the bottom of it like a body at the bottom of a lake. Your Honor, Esther said, the petitioners have presented this as a frightened mother independently fleeing for safety. The documents show a coordinated, pre-planned removal, funded and housed by Ms. McBride through business entities she failed to disclose when this court ordered full financial production. We'd ask the court to refer the financial discrepancies, and the entities themselves, to the appropriate regulatory authorities. The word regulatory did to Bertha's face what no accusation of bad parenting ever could, because Bertha understood instantly and completely what a regulatory referral meant for a title company. It meant auditors. It meant every backdated lien and smoothed-over closing she'd done for 40 years. All those favors for favored clients, pulled into the light by people who didn't smile and couldn't be charmed. She had come to this courtroom to take a man's children. She was going to leave it having handed the state a thread that led straight into her vault. Shelby was watching her mother's face, and for the first time in her life, Shelby saw fear on it. That was the moment. Israel watched it happen, watched it move across the daughter's features like a cloud shadow. That Shelby understood she had not been the heroine of a story about escaping, a dangerous man. She'd been a tool in her mother's hand. The incidents she'd been coached to write, the counselor she'd been sent to, the flight she'd thought was brave, all of it built by the woman beside her, for reasons that had nothing to do with protecting anyone. Israel had counted on this too. He hadn't tried to destroy Shelby. He'd let the truth do it, because a truth you discover yourself cuts deeper than any accusation. And a tool that realizes it's been used stops being loyal to the hand. The custody evaluation that followed was, by comparison, almost gentle. Shelby, shaken, no longer reading from her mother's script, was honest with the evaluator in a way she'd never been honest with herself. She admitted the incidents had been exaggerated. She admitted her mother had encouraged the move. She admitted, in a small voice, that the boys missed their father and asked for him every night. The evaluator's report was quiet and devastating. It found no evidence Israel was anything but a stable, attentive father. It found that the children had been removed through deception coordinated by the maternal grandmother. It recommended Israel receive primary physical custody, with Shelby having generous, supervised at first, then unsupervised visitation. Supervised not because she was dangerous, but because she needed, in the evaluator's careful words, support in establishing independence from family influence. The family court judge adopted the recommendation. Israel got his sons. He picked them up not at a chained gate but at a neutral exchange center, and when Owen, 5, ran across the linoleum and hit him at full speed, Israel finally, let the ice in his chest crack and held both boys on the floor for a long time while the staff pretended to do paperwork. He never raised his voice. He never broke a window. He never said a word he couldn't prove. He'd told the officer the truth on that first golden evening. He never did anything dumb. That had been his whole problem. Once. Too careful to fight back against the people who controlled his life. This time, being careful was how he won. The downfall of Bertha McBride happened in public, the way she'd done everything. Except that for the first time it wasn't a story she controlled. The regulatory referral became an audit. The audit became an investigation. The smoothed-over closings and the backdated liens, the favors she'd been so proud of, the secret machinery of 40 years, came into the light client by client, document by document. Her title and escrow license was suspended, then revoked. The favored clients she'd helped, suddenly exposed, turned on her to save themselves, just as she had always assumed everyone eventually would, only this time they were doing it to her. 2 of the older fraud counts carried real criminal exposure. The strip mall and the ranch went into the machinery of lawyers and settlements. She had spent her life believing that whoever produced the paper first would win. She had been right. She had simply never imagined that the person across the table would be a man who read every document twice, who built models of how small lies become large disasters, and who had quietly, patiently produced the paper that ended her, using her own bricks, as Esther had said, to build the wall that buried her. Shelby did the hard, unglamorous work of becoming a person separate from her mother. It took years. The boys grew up with a father who taught them, more by example than by lecture, that the loudest person in the room is rarely the strongest, and that the most dangerous thing you can be, to someone who lies for a living, is the person who keeps the receipts. It's Nathan again. I want to leave you with the part I find most useful, because it's the part people get wrong. We tend to imagine that justice in a situation like this comes from explosion, from the wronged parent storming the gate, going viral, screaming the truth until someone believes them. It almost never works that way, and the reason is the thing this story is really about. In any conflict that ends up in a courtroom, the contest isn't who's louder, it's who can prove what they say. Israel didn't win because he was a good man, though he was. He won because while everyone else was performing emotions, he was building a record, dated, sourced, and impossible to wave away. There's a genuinely practical lesson buried in the thriller. If you ever find yourself in a custody fight, or honestly any high-stakes conflict with someone willing to lie, stop trying to win the argument and start documenting the facts. Save the emails, note the dates, keep the receipts, don't delete anything. The instinct to react loudly is exactly the instinct that turns a victim into the person who looks unstable on the stand, and the person manipulating you is usually counting on that reaction. Bertha's entire plan depended on Israel raging at the gate. The deeper thing, the part that stays with me, manipulators like Bertha don't fear anger, they feed on it. What they fear is a calm person who simply refuses to forget what's true. That's a harder thing to be than it sounds, especially when your kids are on the other side of a chained gate. But it's the one weapon they never know how to fight.